If you don't mind, I'll read from the statement.
Yep, that's fine.
Members of the Governing Council, friends and family of Garry Inge, I'm here at the request of Garry Inge to speak on his behalf as a candidate for the Superior Court of Massachusetts. Over 20 years ago, I first met with Garry Inge, who was representing a member of a religious order I had sued on behalf of a husband and wife who had been injured in a car accident. For privacy reasons, I'm going to be precise in terms of the facts of the case. The defendant, whom Garry Inge had represented, crossed the center lines of a highway and struck the plaintiff's motor vehicle in a head-on collision. The husband suffered a head injury and had to have a craniotomy, which injury and damages were apparent to everyone. The wife's case was more complicated because initially no one was able to diagnose her injury, which turned out to be a herniated disc in her neck. Attorney Inge handled this case professionally on behalf of the defendant, and after a period of time, the case was settled to the satisfaction of the plaintiffs who were badly injured. Fast forward 20-plus years. Again, I represented a plaintiff who was injured when the airbag in a vehicle deployed and she was injured. As you may or may not know, when an airbag deploys, there are chemicals that cause airbags to deploy, and these chemicals cause facial burns to my client, who was a single working mother who was emigrating to this country. As you can imagine, this woman was sensitive about her facial appearance, especially when her mother would point out the marks which were known after the accident. I was impressed by Attorney Inge's handling this case on behalf of the defendant. Specifically, Garry Inge took a deposition of my client who spoke English with an accent. Attorney Inge showed great patience in listening testimony from my client as to what occurred. He was careful to question my client at length and not make her feel uneasy about her language skills. Additionally, Attorney Inge was sensitive to my client's injuries and asked her to show her facial injuries to him so that he could observe them for himself and be able to report them to the defendant's representatives. Again, I was impressed by Attorney Inge's sensitivity to this woman who was concerned about her language skills and her appearance. In 1850, Abraham Lincoln wrote, "As a peacemaker, the lawyer has a superior opportunity of being a good man." Garry Inge is a good man. During Attorney Inge's handling of this case, he discussed with me another case that he was working on, which was a far bigger case. He told me he was diligently working on this case, he was taking depositions, and he was keeping himself informed on medical issues which were important to the case and his representation of the defendant. Again, I was impressed from the first time I met Attorney Inge that he could handle the big cases, and he was doing so again. I am more impressed by his handling of the small cases. The cases that routinely come before the Superior Court and which mean a great deal to the litigant. As a practicing lawyer in the courts of the Commonwealth, I highly recommend Garry Inge's candidacy to the Governor's Council as an attorney who will be able to handle the big cases and the small cases, and who still strives to learn what needs to be known about people and cases. He will be able to deal with sensitivity that with the parties who come before him, some of whom may have limited language skills and limited knowledge of the system, and from what I have seen, Judge Inge will show great sensitivity to them and counsel. Recently I was in church, and while reading the Bible, came across a portion of the scripture which reminded me of Garry Inge, and which I'll quote to you from Psalm 112, verse 5-6. "Well for the man who is gracious and lend, who conducts his affairs with justice. He shall never be moved, the just one shall be in everlasting remembrance." When I saw this passage, I was reminded of Garry, because he is gracious, and he does conduct his affairs with justice. When I state that he shall never be moved, I mean that he is a person of integrity in my part. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'd like to introduce Councilor Marilyn Tito. Don't forget you. Next we'll hear from Carolyn Davis.
I had a phone call. I'm sorry. I got a phone call.
Thank you.
Thank you. I guess I
Okay. Thank you.
My name is Carolyn Davis, and I come at this from a little different angle, as I'm a person who deals with young children at Oakdale Preschool in Oakdale Church, Copley Square, Boston. It's in that context, as a director now nearing 30 years occasion to be an observer and work hard to be an accomplished one. With great regularity through the years, I have extended invitations from families to maintain connections once they leave school. Thus, I have many dinners, games, recitals, and fun events that liven up things for me. My testimony today presents a view of Garry Inge that makes visible features of a conscientious man who moves modestly through life. I found that attributes he holds, such as integrity, respectfulness, and commitment, are best illuminated when reviewing actual conditions. Because of accepting an invitation to remain connected long ago, I come by this information through many years of observing Garry Inge and family. I have a few anecdotes. They're really stories showing his attributes, and they offer a glimpse into his life as was being observed over time, day to day, while he was a member of school communities and later, when contact centered on developmental issues of growing adolescents and older teens. Experience teaches us that children, especially the young ones, ages 2 to 5, cause a host of characteristics to take shape in their parents as they develop. Some of them are exemplary, many of them are not. During these years, I noticed people really reveal their souls. Garry Inge proved that he could find the most suitable ways to function, discover appropriate responses, and dive right in. He showed fortitude and resilience. In his school community, being congenial made him well received by adults and children alike, often requested by fellow parents from earlier years until now to collect more than one child to go here and to meet there. His energetic, lighthearted spirit and selfless manner made the deed enjoyable for all. It's other people's children, however, who actually put a face on his ways and made public the strength of his appeal and receptivity. I'll begin with those early preschool years. Just picture this. 2- and 3-year-olds plopped and draped upon a body that's reading books, stretched full out on the classroom floor in morning drop-off time. That body was Mr. Inge. He was like a Pied Piper with young children in that community and with some adults as well. Just the right composure, just the right tone, a welcoming glance, and there he was with a lap full of kids, 5 or 6 of them. He often, in a crowd of adults, enjoyed one another's company too. Likability melded with consistency, and before long he had a following made possible by children and a trusting collegial parent group that shared a preschool experience. A couple of years later, many a day, sing-song sounds of his name filled from the 4-year-old classroom. The chant often erupted when he arrived to pick up his children at the end of the day. His set of classmates had taken a liking to him too, having experienced inviting engagement whenever they met. These classmates were vying for their own connections with Garry, as they call it. I observed that children do not gravitate to people who emit disingenuous vibes. They read adults and approach, but a certain tone is present, what I identified as a show of respect. Maneuvering through the requirements of daily dance lessons and gymnastics lessons and carpools was something I observed Mr. Inge dutifully did as well. He collected at least 2 children, one his own, another a friend of his child, for weekly ballet lessons. He was adept at handling the bustle of the real deal occasion, and he found himself to be a go-to guy. Fast forward a couple of years to graduation ceremonies, upcoming kindergartners, and you can imagine the scene. Rows of parents, rows of chairs, waiting to be an audience, kids of all kinds of it unsettled. Parents say they experience nervousness in these occasions, and being in that state when children become uncooperative due to their own nerves, they find themselves challenged by trying to persuade the child to go forward. You know what I'm going to say. Mr. Inge had a child who suffered a big case of nerves and refused to sit in front of the audience. Negotiations ensued through a linus-type blanket covering the child and the nurse. When the conversation ended, the 2 of them, somewhat still covered, sat down, ready for graduation festivities to begin with everyone. It was no small feat managing that situation to a satisfactory end. The bottom line was that the child did not fail to participate.